Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Suzi Q. Smith, and it's my honor to host tonight's conversation and celebrate the Activating Read Award winner and be in conversation with Mariame Kaba this evening. So, I want to just introduce a few things before we get started in our conversation. So, it is Margins Bookstores Month. This month of October. So, Margins Bookstores is a celebration of bookstores that are owned and managed by and for BIPOC, LGBTQIA, disabled, and neurodiverse communities. This is a community collaboration coordinated by The Word. The Word is a nonprofit fighting for equity through literary arts. You can find more about us at thewordfordiversity.org, which I will also post in the chat. We also want to say a quick thank you to major sponsors of Margins Bookstores Month, bookshop.org and Chronicle Books. Margins Bookstore Month celebrations are all through October this year. You can search our online interactive map to find a bookstore and get to know them near you, their vision, their fun secrets, and you can support these bookstores by purchasing the Margins Bookstores Journal and t-shirts, tote bags, and more. It's estimated that less than 5% of bookstores in the US are owned by and serve marginalized communities. Every bit of support you offer goes a long way in helping these stores who are shouldering so many duties, as they are among the few healing spaces that our communities have. I'll share more in the chat, direct link to that interactive map if you would like to check that out. Also, as part of Margins Bookstores Month, we are introducing the Choice Awards. So these are nominated and selected by the Margins Bookstores collective of BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, disabled, and neurodiverse owned and managed bookstores. And these awards recognize outstanding literary works that represent the multitudes in our communities. With the Activating Read Award, which is the award we're going to talk about tonight, we celebrate what moves us toward action. This award is for a read that moved us to live change. Tonight, we are joined by the recipient of the Activating Read Award, Mariame Kaba, author of We Do This Till We Free Us, Abolitionist Organizing and Transformative Justice. Mariame Kaba is an organizer, educator, and curator who is active in movements for racial, gender, and transformative justice. She is the founder and director of Project NIA, a grassroots organization with a vision to end youth incarceration. Mariame is currently a researcher at Interrupting Criminalization, Research and Action at the Barnard Center for Research on Women, a project she co-founded with Andrea Ritchie in 2018. Mariame has co-founded multiple other organizations and projects over the year, including We Charge Genocide, the Chicago Freedom School, the Chicago Task Force on Violence Against Girls and Young Women, Love and Protect, the Just Practice Collaborative, and Survived and Punished. Mariame serves on the advisory boards of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, Critical Resistance, and the Chicago Community Bond Fund. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, The Nation magazine, The Guardian, The Washington Post, In These Times, Teen Vogue, The New Inquiry, and more. She co-authored the guidebook Lifting as They Climbed and published a children's book titled Missing Daddy about the impacts of incarceration on children and families. Kaba is the recipient of the Cultural Freedom Prize from the Lannan Foundation and many more. And it is my privilege and honor to be in conversation with Mariame tonight. So welcome, Mariame. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. And thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to join you and want to take this time right now first to thank Margins Bookstores and the collective for awarding or giving this award as Activating Read Award to this book. I'm thrilled and I'm so excited. And as somebody who absolutely loves independent bookstores and shops at independent bookstores, I'm a huge supporter of them when I was living in Chicago, here, also everywhere. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for making the time for us this evening. I'm sure your schedule is a very, very busy one. But I'm very excited to be talking with you tonight. I work for The Word, and also our whole staff was very excited to be part of this conversation with you tonight. Our founder and executive director actually was a public defender in Chicago for many years and now resides here in Colorado with me. But So there you have some strong advocates and fans in this
That's
organization.
kind.
So it's definitely my honor. I want to start with a few questions. One, so, and this is not your first book, but this one has been huge, right? New York Times bestseller. So I'm sure it's had a huge, significant impact, like in all the ways that people talk about abolition and think about abolition in communities around the United States and around the world. And so I'm wondering, has the impact been what you expected? And have there been some surprises for you?
Oh my gosh, the whole thing is a complete mind f, you know. Yes, absolutely. I'm surprised at the book's reception. I'm incredibly grateful that it found its audience. And I'm really grateful to Haymarket, the publisher, because part of the audience that I was hoping to reach with this book, the main audience initially were incarcerated comrades and loved ones. And so the fact that at this point now almost 5,000 books have gone to groups that work with incarcerated people to be sent and shared there. And I've gotten so many messages and responses and letters to people to ask them to contact me about the book. That just means everything to me and is the most important thing. And then the fact that other people have been receptive has been wonderful too. But I'm very aware that it almost has little to do with the book or me. It has to do much more with the current moment we're in, and the kind of the conjuncture of all the historical forces that have come together to make people more interested in hearing and in listening. There's this African proverb that talks about our hope is to uh, make sure that people have an ear. Basically, it's some version of that, which has less to do with you, but more to do with them and whether they're ready to listen. And when they're ready to listen, then your message will be heard. And so this is in part for me that people have an ear and they were ready to engage the ideas, read the book, disagree with it, pick up the parts that were useful. So yeah, the whole thing has been a complete and utter, not, I wouldn't call it surprise. I would just call it so incredible. I think it would be the word that I'll use. Incredible in all of its meanings. Yeah.
So when you think this is work that you've been doing for a very long time, is there something
Mhm.
specific that you can attribute, you think, people being more ready for this conversation? I know, and even 5 years ago, if you said abolition in most rooms, people would kind of scoff.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and now people are really ready for the conversation. I find I love this as a resource because people come to me frequently like, where can I learn more about abolition? And I can say, start here, right? This
Yeah.
is where you should begin. So what would you attribute that readiness for?
Oh my goodness, it has a lot to do with all of the forces that have combined in the last few years to disrupt people's day to day. And that includes the election of a proto fascist in the United States, the election of much more right wing candidates worldwide, and what that's done to destabilize many societies. Then we had a global pandemic that also shifted so much for all of us, something none of us, almost no one who's alive today had ever experienced before in the way that we did. So much death making, so much economic disruption, and in some cases, immiseration. And then there was the always existing racial pandemic, racist pandemic of anti-Blackness that led and created the conditions where George Floyd was murdered and killed in Minneapolis. That lit a spark. But it wasn't just about George Floyd. It was about so many other things coming together, pushing people into the streets. Something like 26 or 25, 25 or 26 million people estimated to have taken part in the actual protests around the killing of George Floyd. But it was also just about all the other things that have accumulated over time. And then, we get into the new year. I mean, November happens, there's an election, supposedly Trump loses, but we're spending months and weeks in a basically low grade at some points very direct coup d'etat attempt, leading to an insurrection in the Capitol in January of this year. So my book comes out at the end of February. It's the long kind of, build up that's been going on if you just take the last 4 years and then all the years that come before then. So I'm always really aware of the fact that none of us is living as vacuums. We all are impacted by all sorts of social forces. And you can't pick the time when people are going to have an ear. So you should always be doing work consistently, always putting up the messages consistently, always build up your analysis and be strong in that, because you never know when people are going to be ready to listen to a particular thing that may have seemed, far off or outside the mainstream a day before. So I think that's the lesson.
I think that is a beautiful lesson and brings me to my next question. When we think about, I'd like to know what you think about, like, what role would you say books play in creating change in the world, right? We're talking about this activating read. And I think this book has specifically inspired a lot of people to action. Um,
Mm.
and not all literature does, of course, right? But
Mhm.
what would you say is the role of books and bookstores in creating that political education and motivating people to move?
That's such a good question. And I think a lot about the role of art in general. Um, that what we do in social movements is a form of collective art making we're doing together all the time, and that books are partly art as well. Even the ones that aren't done well are bad art, but they're art. Um, and I think art has the possibility of doing so much. What is it? It can lift the ceilings from our imaginations. It can help us find something to connect around, right? That's what bookstores at their best are. They're like community centers. There are potential spaces where we come together to hear ideas that maybe we haven't heard before, to be in space together with people we may not interact with on the day to day of our lives, to convene, um, and offer disruptive ideas. So all those are reasons to love bookstores and to love books. But you're right, in and of themselves, it's not just the book form that does anything. It's what we do with the book form that matters. It's the thinking you do alongside somebody who's written a book. So just having my book and reading it isn't enough at all. It has to be that you're reading it, you're putting it up against your own experience, then you're using that to shape your experience, and you're also shaping your experience shapes what you read. And it's kind of this dialectical opportunity for us to be able to be thinking with other people. It's such a beautiful way to think with others when you're reading, because at its best for me, I know people really value the solitary nature sometimes of reading by themselves, and that feels like a good way of, either relaxing or being transported to some other place. But I like reading as a collective activity. And by reading, I mean not just reading silently, but also reading aloud, also listening to a book. Also, so I like collective nature of reading. I'm not just about like the solitary pleasures that people may get from those kinds of experiences. I want the book to live with other people, which is why I've been so happy and just so gratified to know how many book clubs have come out of people just wanting to take this book and talk about it with other people. Like, to me, what's the use of it? I mean, I understand people have beautiful writing and, things that make your heart sing because you read it. I think that matters. But for me, as an organizer, what matters is that people take the ideas, apply them into their own lives, change them, argue with them, and then go forward and do something in the world that's about improving it.
I love that. And also, giving us a discussion guide, it's really set up to really be integrated into the way that people practice, right? And that
Yeah.
balance between theory and practice is missing from a lot of books. And I think that a lot of it can get really academic and really heady, in ways that just invites people from participating in
Yeah, but
actual output.
I hear you on that, except I want to also add that not hard, but like academic books have their place, and the place for them is also in a communal reading experience, which is why the classroom is such an important site of thinking together and thinking about hard texts together and trying to argue about hard ideas together and deciding where we come out after it, right? Because I don't want anybody to feel like, I think we have a question in our society about what we mean when we say things ought to be accessible. I want to push back on the fact that, like, I keep hearing people talking about poor people in such degrading ways in this country, as though poor people in particular don't have abilities to wrestle with, care about, understand, create very hard ideas and and inaccessible text. Like, it's not a function of your social location, it's a function of what you're writing and how you're writing it, and then who the audiences are and whether the audiences can receive it, because my book is inaccessible to a bunch of people, right? A bunch of people who refuse to get out of carceral logics and who will read this book and immediately feel like a repulsion to it and say to me would say on a regular basis, I can't wrap my head around abolition, right? I can't even. And that's not a question about me. That's something they have to struggle with.
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed.
So I just wanted to put that out there too, because yeah.
When I say academic writing, so I think about like things that are only available on if you have a JSTOR account.
Yeah.
Right? Things that are just literally not
Paywalled.
accessible if you're not in academia, right?
Exactly. Paywalled information, or information that's purposely kept from the people. Yes, exactly. I hear you 100% on that.
And so some of those texts are very difficult to literally access for most people. And so this is much more accessible, in which it's in most bookstores, so much so that it became a New York Times bestseller. And so at least now I'm hoping that this shifts conversations culturally forward enough that people aren't reacting in the ways that they were reacting before this book was available to them, right?
Yeah, I hope so too.
I feel like the conversations I have with people, there's a marked difference. And it's
I'm
not
glad to know it
for people, right? It's not a brand new. I think in the same way that Ta-Nehisi Coates' article on reparations, right?
Yes.
Because I remember, like, even I think in the 2012, maybe 16 election, I think Bernie Sanders, I remember this. Someone asked him about reparations, and he just sort of chuckled, and that was his response, and that was the most progressive candidate, right? But that gave people a talking point and a very, very accessible way to start thinking about it in a very real way, and take it more seriously. And so I think sometimes, right, having those things, or I think about reading The New Jim Crow, for instance, right? All of those things that we inherently knew in our communities, but seeing the data, right? Seeing the research and having it all in one place, and knowing and having a place to point to, knowing, no, it's not just me, to all the people that might gaslight me for my radical opinions, right? Be like, no, there are many other people who have done some research, who've done some thinking about this, who've done some organizing around it. And this opinion is not mine alone.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It can help to be like, oh, someone else said, right? These experts said these things, right? So how have your work and your life changed since this book has been released?
Wow. My work is the exact same. It will always be the exact same. I am committed to liberation for my people. And I've been committed to that since, I was a small person, but particularly since my teenage years, and particularly when I had a politics and a kind of a words for it. So that will always be the case. And so that's never changed. And I think that my life changed in the instance that I started library school in January of this year. The book came out in February, and so I'm in library school. So my life looks very different in terms of right now, school full-time, working more than full-time, and I've got another book coming. So I have a manuscript for a book due in 2 weeks. So it's been really hard to try to juggle all of those things together with grace, and also without completely burning myself out. So those are the things that are different in that sense, is like kind of managing my time, but nothing about the book that's out has shifted me. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I'm old. Like I'm going to be 50 in a couple of weeks. And I'm so lucky. I say this all the time. Like, I really know who I am in a deeply, deeply embodied way. So nothing that happens externally has a huge impact on me, right? And I think, like, if this had happened, if I'd had the same issue, which it couldn't have because I wouldn't have had all the experience to put into a book, but if it had happened when I was 25, I don't think I would have been able to handle it. Meaning, like, the request for like all the request for interviews and like, I wouldn't have had any boundaries. I wouldn't have been able to say I'm only doing 2 events this month. I would, like, these things wouldn't have been accessible to me in the way that they are as a 50-year-old person, you know? So I think that has a lot to do with why I'm where I'm, like, how I am and what's happened around the book itself.
I'm wondering also about the visibility of it, right? Has that changed the way that people are sort of demanding access to you?
People have always demanded access to me in multiple different kinds of ways, even when no one knew my name, in the sense that I've always been in community. I've always been with a lot. And so people have always said, oh, go talk to Mariame about blah, blah, blah. Go talk to Mariame about blah, blah, blah. So I've always had that kind of demand. I think, again, like, I think if I were, you know, I don't do like TV. I'm not like that kind of present, I think. And I don't think so. People don't treat me very differently than they always treat me. And in fact, I think people probably think to themselves, like, I'm somebody that they could be in community with, right? Like, so I don't get the same kind of whatever. And I also make it a point to, like, I'm not in, like, I'm never going to be, quote, a celebrity of any sort, because, like, I'm just, that's not of interest to me. And, you know, I don't ever show my, like, I hardly show my face. So that would be a problem in this age. So I think about that all the time. Like, what, you know, the demands of, to make yourself so public, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't owe anybody details of my life. I think most people don't really know a lot about me in terms of my personal life. And that's on purpose. I think people think they know me more because if you're in social media, there's a sense that people feel like they know you in that kind of way. But I'm very keen to, like, keep my personal life personal and to be in the public in ways that can be supportive and helpful. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
It does. And I think that there is this, you know, I think the question about, so, and I do see what you mean. I think I followed you on Twitter for years before I ever knew your name. For instance.
Yes, exactly.
So, but I liked what you were talking about, so I was here for it.
There you
It doesn't really
go.
matter, right?
You
And
didn't need to know my name.
exactly, right? And it was centering the work. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that. I also think about the erasure of Black women and the labor of Black women.
Yes.
Commonly, right? And so I think it's a challenging line to walk, right?
It is.
Where we know your name, honor your name, and also decenter the individual, right?
It's very hard, Suzi. I mean, you know, this is partly a thing. I think I mentioned it in the book, did I? Or maybe I mentioned it in an interview with Eve Ewing, because Eve asked me how it felt, to why I made a transition over the last decade or so from being completely behind the scenes to more public. And I told Eve in that interview, I don't know if it's republished in the book or if it was part of the longer interview, I explained why it was, or how it was, that I made this shift. And it was really actually a white friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who we were working on something together, and I was like, oh, no, let's just put it out. We don't need to put our names on it. I don't need to put my name on it. And she was like, oh, isn't that interesting? And it wasn't like it wasn't in this like way that was like an accusatory way at all. But she's like, isn't it interesting that you're so interested in recovering the histories of Black women of the past, and here you are erasing yourself? That was like, that was a moment like a dagger in my heart that it took months it took me so long to get over it. Like I think I just was shocked by the words because I hadn't ever thought of it in those contexts when it related to me.
Right.
You know, like I could see it in other people, but the way I was trained, the people who were my touchstones taught me that organizers in the back, leaders up front. And so
Right.
I always just took that as a thing. And for years, Susie, for years, I've seen people use to this day materials that I've made that don't have my name on it.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen in other workshops, like that are 20 years old. And I know that because it's photocopied. So it's clearly like photocopied from things I wrote. And I'm like, wow, okay. And I like personally, it doesn't bother me. Like I really doesn't. But I then realized like for the young folks that I was basically mentoring as young organizers, what a bad look, right? To be like, yeah, you put all your stuff out there. People take it. They don't know who put it out. How do we trace the lineage of things? I changed my heart about it in order to change my mind about it.
Yeah.
And that's really what happened.
Well, I'm glad that friend asked you that question because I think, and it's such a common story. And I think many of us are trained to be as invisible as possible, right?
That's right.
And to be martyrs, essentially for the movements we're in.
Or just the politics of it. That's what I came up in. That's that was the work. You did the work.
Right.
And it didn't really matter. You don't think about credit. And then somebody really had to shake me, but then also teach me that it wasn't about getting credit. It was about the fact that it's important to know where ideas come from, right? Because they don't come from nowhere. Right. And also as a Black woman, that I did have a responsibility beyond just my personal self to not model for younger Black women that what they needed to do was not be present in their own work. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I think that's also a key thing too, and like what we model for future generations. Because I think that, the representation is important, right? You need to have those models to know, oh, okay, if this person can do this thing, then I can do this thing, right? And it removes sort of some of that mystery and magic from it and goes like, okay, this is the collective organizing work of people who are just like me.
Yes. It's tricky though, right? It's tricky, the concept of representation, because I immediately inside, like I cringe at that notion of the representation thing, and yet knowing full well that if I hadn't seen Black women doing certain kinds of things, I don't know that I could have seen myself doing those things. So, it's such a hard line.
It is, right? And that line between visibility, representation, tokenization, and all of the ways that they play into each other, and all of those things. I one of the many things I do is teach middle school. And I had a book called Young Revolutionary in my classroom, and a girl who did not identify strongly as a reader recognized herself in the cover. She looked a lot like the girl on the cover, and she tried to steal this book from me. And it was very exciting. I was so proud of her. I was so proud of that moment. Just like representation. Look at the classroom, right? And so it was really, really sweet to have this girl.
I love that.
Time, right? But I also think about the legacy, right, that we leave for the young ones, right? I had this conversation with a young Black femme organizer who was, really, really delighted in their work, and was saying also, they're doing their dream work. They're early in their journey, very young 20s, and saying, I love this work. This is my dream job. I don't ever want to do anything else. And yet I see all of my elders and all of my mentors getting sick. I see all of you dying too young, getting sick, et cetera. And so I'm wondering, is that what this work costs, right? So I do want to ask you about like self-care, right? You're carrying a lot of things, right? You're balancing a ton of things right now. How do you care for yourself? And what is that like, self-care, community care? What's your relationship to that?
Oh, well, that's in the book too, my rant about self-care. But it's not that I don't believe in self-care. Not at all. Of course, I think that you should care about yourself. Of course, I think that we ought to take care of ourselves. But I do think that within the context of capitalism, it's really important to lift up collective care, because we cannot actually live by ourselves only. We can't. What capitalism does is it doesn't just alienate ourselves from our labor. It also alienates ourselves from ourselves and each other. And I think if we don't have a communal care, it's very hard to live in this society. I think about this all the time with friends of mine who have children, my siblings who have kids. Like, if we didn't all step up for each other, those of us who have no biological children, stepping up for and with the people that have them, how would anything really happen? Like, people need support, they need help. We need to collectivize our care in order for ourselves to be able to live and thrive. And so that's the relationship for me that I see, is that collective care enables you to take care of yourself better. Because then you have folks around you. I have chronic illness. If I didn't have people who insisted on, friends of mine, and it's a struggle, right? Because I'm an independent person. I don't like to talk about being sick. I don't like to constantly have people asking me about being sick, right? I understand that. And every time I've had a surgery, people have come, insisted on being with me. Family members, friends, people have mailed me care packages. People have dropped off food and said, I know you don't want me, blah, 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 but here it's just at your door. You don't need to see me. I just want you to have this. And how would I be able to care for myself without that? Like, I could figure it out. I could do it. It would just be 10 times harder, and I would be exhausted even more. And so that's how I see collective care is so necessary. And it's not something we should take lightly. I think it matters what kind of relationships we have with each other, because human beings are interdependent. We're like mammals who are like, we can't actually survive without each other. There's not a thing I do right now. I'm on this Zoom call with you. Somebody made this technology. It wasn't me. The things I ate this morning, somebody picked the fruit that I ate, and somebody, ground the flour that I used to make pancakes, and somebody else made it possible for me today to be able to use a laptop that allows me to communicate with everybody on Twitter. So, like, all these things, they seem like, disconnected, disjointed, but there's not a thing you do almost in this world where somebody didn't have a hand in helping you do it. The clothes I'm wearing, even if I knit them, somebody made the yarn. Right? Like, and so we need to be really clear about that. And under a capitalist society, they really encourage you not to think that way, to be all about bootstrapping yourself. Who's bootstrapping themselves?
Right.
You're bootstrapping yourself into poverty. You're not going to be able to do anything without other people. So, yeah, that's how I think about care in general, and collective care, self-care.
I think a lot of that's cultural too, right? And also having collective care, having community care also allows us to have a more abolitionist society, right?
Yes. It's the only way, actually.
Too, right? Like, we don't necessarily, I grew up in a family where I was raised by my grandmother. So she essentially was my family's social services, right? And that's how we did that. We didn't call police, we called each other, right? And that was, and that's just a normal cultural practice for us. I don't think there's anything really unique about my family in that way, because it is so common, especially amongst African-American families. So these are not brand new concepts to us, right? If you haven't considered prisons as a resource, right? That's just not something that's ever been a plus for us, or our first go-to in any circumstance, right? So we've had to be, I think we have those phrases, right, in our family, in our communities. Oftentimes, we all we got, right, is one of those things. So we take care of us in all of the ways. And so it's not a brand new concept to a lot of us, particularly under-resourced communities where we've had to be all of those things for ourselves and each other, and fill in all of those gaps.
So I
Yeah.
think the tension in that is the tension of where, at what point and in what ways do we make demands on the collective commons and on the state to provide the things that it owes us?
Indeed.
Because we can do a lot with each other, and I do. We can figure ourselves out through mutual aid, but a lot of work has to also be scaled to the collective, in the collectivist sense, beyond very small decentralized groups. And so it's not an easy answer. Like, I'm always struggling with the answer of, like, what kinds of demands should we make to the state? Do we need a state? Can we have a different form of governance? All those are questions I wrestle with all the time, and I go back and forth on it, depending on who I'm listening to, who I'm reading, what I'm learning in the moment. So I hear you, and it's yes to that, and yes,
Right.
and it's always yes, and yeah.
Yes. Because I firm those are kind of my my
Yeah.
major, those are my conversations politically, is just like we're talking about abolition and reparations. Those are the conversations about me
Yeah.
and the state. That's what I want to
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah.
Things
Yeah.
like,
We're all having it. We're
kind of all
all
those things.
having it.
Right. Exactly.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Can we have a non-carceral state? Does that exist? Like, those are all questions, right? Yeah.
that I continually work through.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little more about who you read growing up, and who are some of the people that have helped inform your ideas and perspective then and also now.
Wow. Who did I read growing up? So I went to French schools when I was a kid. So I read mostly in French, but I also read in English class. I read I read Shakespeare and Hemingway and Hawthorne. So, like, all the white men, Melville, for English lit classes. And then, also because I was in a French school, I read Camus and I read Proust and I read other folks like that, which I always had a kind of affinity, soft spot for Camus. I hated Proust, and I wouldn't probably go back to try to read him again. So I read those kinds of books. And then when I was outside of school, I had a whole bunch of books that I was able to read because they were on my dad's bookshelf. So Autobiography of Malcolm X, I read when I was like 12 years old. Totally transformed so much of my thinking. I read Camarade Lai's book called L'Enfant Noir, The Dark Child, I guess, in English. I read Leopold Senghor's poetry because my dad had a bunch of his poetry books. I read a bunch of pamphlets by socialist writers that my dad had on bookshelves as well. I read a book by Ali Galem, which was called a wife for my son, which was a book my dad had. And then in terms of Black women, the first books I read by Black women were books by Mariame Kaba and Maryse Condé, which were the first books by Black women that I read on my own. When I must have been like 15 or 16 at that time. And it was not until I got to college that a whole world of other books and authors really opened up to me. But growing up as a kid, those were the kinds of books I read. I read Le Petit Prince, by Saint-Exupéry. I read like those kinds of books, a lot of French books. And then when I went to college, I was exposed to C.L.R. James because I dated a person who was obsessed with C.L.R. James. And he opened up a whole world of people to me who I hadn't read before. And I still go back to James's essay called Every Cook Can Govern, which is a study of democracy in ancient Greece, which was published in the mid-1950s. My go-to text when I'm always thinking about fascism. I also read some notes that C.L.R. James wrote and offered about Karl Marx's Capital before I read Capital. But they're published now. Those notes are published in Dave Austin's book, You Don't Play with Revolution. And then I just kept growing. I read a lot of Gerald Horne's books because I got interested in Black communists and communism in my early 20s. And so I started reading a whole bunch of Black communists that Louise Thompson Patterson's piece from 1936 called Toward the Brighter Dawn, which prefigures Claudia Jones's triple exploitation argument. So people should pick that up if they're interested in those concepts. I read Du Bois, Souls of Black Folks, and then later on I read Black Reconstruction when I was in grad school. I was always fascinated by Cheikh Anta Diop, and so I read Cheikh Anta Diop. I read Black women radicals like Barbara Smith, because all the Homegirls and the Some of Us Are Brave and all those texts that came together of that period of time. I started reading those in college. Fran Beal and her stuff, and Toni Cade Bambara. So the list is so long. I just read all the time, and I've continued to read, and Amilcar Cabral's speeches, and Robin D.G. Kelly, and Charles Payne, who was my grad school mentor, Audre Lorde, Grace Lee Boggs. The list goes on and on. I have so many favorites, and I come back to them over and over and over again. And I read widely. I don't just read. I read in French also. So I read stuff from, I've read Foucault's stuff in French. I've read, all those people. George Jackson was a person I started reading when I was in grad school. I hadn't encountered his work before. It was Assata's autobiography in my college years that after I graduated from college, that I think it came out in 91 maybe. So it might have been like right when I graduated that I read Assata's autobiography. And then that led me into a whole nother rabbit hole of people I needed to read from the BLA. So a lot of books. Does that give you a general sense? I can go on and on.
It's bring me joy, and it also is a bit sad to me, that because it's not an uncommon story that so many of us don't really get into Black authors until college, right? And or grad school, right? So no George Jackson until grad school. You need to grad school to know George Jackson, and just imagine if he was someone we knew growing up. Right?
I know. I was lucky. Yeah, I was lucky. I read a lot of Black people as a young person because my dad had a lot of Black people on his shelves. They were just not USian Blacks.
Yeah.
I think Alex Haley was the only one I had at that time. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I love Senghor's poem Femme Noire. That's a piece that I teach often.
Yes.
So that's but
Senghor is who made me love poetry.
That love letter to Senegal, and it's one of my favorite descriptions of a place. And he says, "Mouth gives music to my mouth," and I just fall over every time.
Oh, I'm so glad you know his work. Yes, I want more people to read him. He's the one who made me so interested in poetry. Just picking up his poems and reading them, and La Négritude and all the concepts, and I loved it. I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's such a beautiful and such a longing in him, right? He was exiled for so long, so you can just feel that longing in all of his work, and home.
Yes.
So just tremendously beautiful. I'm gonna type his name for all of you in the chat so you can look him up.
Look him up. I would be so happy to see his books start getting picked up by younger Black people.
Yes, resurgence, right? I mean, I think I was in my 30s before I ever met June Jordan's work.
Yes. I was so mad that I was lucky because I went to college when I was 17. So I was exposed to June Jordan through Peter Tancred, who was my college professor who I took my first intro to feminism class with. She exposed us to both Audre Lorde and June Jordan. I will always forever be so grateful to her. I was grateful to her all the time, and she really helped to open my mind on the concept of gender. She was my teacher, the first person. I did not think of myself as a woman or a girl before I went to college. So it was Peter Tancred who opened up, and then that became such a huge part of my life, Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm grateful that you had that teacher as well. Yeah, Audre Lorde I've known for a long time, but I feel like they keep June Jordan tucked in a little bit more.
They do. For good reason. She's revolutionary in a different way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so there's one question I have about, I've seen some discourse lately on Twitter, especially around the value of libraries and books. and political education versus, as if it's versus, is the way that this is framed, material support, right? And
That's
the
so
ways that we
sad.
spend our energy, right?
Yeah.
So I want to know a little bit more, like, what role has literature played in your political education, and how does that translate or impact or relate to material support?
Why would people think that material support, it's either or, when we have perfect proof in our current society of folks who are locked up in solitary confinement and they write to their folks and beg for a book? Okay?
Yeah,
That's all I have to say.
absolutely.
If
I think
you are under the biggest kind of deprivation, I mean, read Gramsci's prison notebooks. Okay? If you are trapped in places where, like, you're deprived to the nth degree and what you ask for are some writing utensils and a book, please sit down. Please sit down and do some fucking reading, because that would have helped you figure out, instead of being ridiculous as though it's an either or. And any person, political education is not just about reading. And it's not a banking model. It's a reciprocal relationship based in a popular education that is about us talking about what are the forces in our lives that are leading us into deprivation, suffering, and how can we work together to change them. That's what we mean by political education. We don't just mean read a book. Though I
right.
keep telling people to read books. Everybody
Yeah.
knows I believe that deeply. It's important. You should read. And reading means listening. It means reading out loud with other people. It means communal work. It doesn't mean just staying in your room and reading a book. Okay? Though you can do that too. But it makes me, it infuriates me, really, because it's such a condescending view. They think that the people who say read a book are the elites. And I think those of you who constantly admonish people about it are the actual real anti-intellectual elites. Because the notion that you believe that people who are struggling materially don't have a desire, a need, a want for knowledge is absolutely, it's the most obnoxious thing. I can't even believe it. You know, I spend most of my time, like, on Twitter when I see things like that, just thinking, like, who are you really? Like, what kinds of relationships have you had that this would be, that you would take that on to people? And then most likely you're doing nothing yourself. Right. Which is the part that's worse, which is like, you're saying all this, but are you meeting people's material? Are you feeding people? Are you housing them? Are you doing anything with other people to actually change material conditions for other people? No? Okay, well then, what are you really up to then? Why are you making this argument? And it's never either or. It's always both and triple and. We're doing all things at the same time, trying to get free. And part of getting free, yes, is also thinking with other people. It is absolutely thinking about ideas. Yeah, people aren't just fighting. People aren't, maybe most people aren't always fighting what Cabral. People aren't fighting just for ideas, right? They're fighting to make a material difference. But you know who Cabral was? Doing political education with people 24 hours a day, writing, reading, right?
Right. Right.
So
and also creating a record of that discourse, right? So that we can follow those thoughts, right?
Thank you, right?
For the future
generation. Stop quoting people when you don't know the full context of the struggles they were part of. Right. That's part of why reading is helpful, because it allows you to have more context for what you're saying. And so I'm not mad, particularly when I see that some of these people are very young. I get it, you know? But what I find just disingenuous as fuck is the notion that people who are struggling don't have time to engage in those things like reading because they're so frivolous and so not connected to the day-to-day struggle of being. You know? No, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My grandmother always raised us with this idea. So my grandmother lived during the Depression. She said, you know, there'd be times we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. We wouldn't have anything to eat, but we always had a piano and we always had books.
Right.
And those things in the family.
Right. We had music. We have
always.
Other kinds of things that are necessary to live a full, rounded life. And guess what? We all deserve access to those things, which is why public libraries, yes, I'm going to say it, Okay, people who still, I mean, give me a break. I agree with Anne Lamott that a free library is a revolutionary notion. And if you want to just stick with me on this for a second, let me inform you that libraries in particular places like the United States, it's still one of the very few places in this country where you can walk in, spend time, and spend no money.
Right.
You can even leave with an object that has the power to unleash your imagination and transport you into another world. And guess what? That is magical. And that is filled with revolutionary possibilities. Okay. And I am not a person who is, naive or hasn't lived or doesn't understand real things. I know that libraries, like all institutions under capitalism, are sites of struggle. Of course, I know that. And I also know that everything about libraries is political and not outside of the systems that we're actually struggling against, because all of the forces of oppression live within the institutions that we create, and they sometimes are also perpetuating those forces. So I'm not romantic about libraries, but you know what I am? I'm realistic about what they offer us in terms of an opportunity to keep growing and to keep moving towards a world that we actually want. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
my little spiel on libraries, but it's something that I feel like has to be repeated because I don't think people are thinking thinking in the right, like thinking when they are having these kinds of conversations.
I think that, yeah, I think it's a both and, right?
Yes,
Libraries play a key role, right? It's the last place you can just go and be free.
that's right.
Even parks are often right now limited in who can access parks in many ways, right? And also thinking, of course, about the margins bookstores, right? And they're able to really curate spaces for us to build community in.
Yes,
Well beyond what libraries often will do. And so in that way, I'm really glad that we have them, right? The one that we have here local to me, I know that I walk into that bookstore and feel immediately at home. I don't feel like
yes,
looking at me like I'm going to steal. I
yeah.
feel like, and also when I look at the bookshelves, they're representative of many of the books that I already have. And if I don't have something that's on their shelves, then I know I need it because we have the same taste. There are a lot of things that are really beautiful when there's a space that's curated to serve a specific community.
I
And
agree. I agree. And also, guess what? Those are places where we're all engaged in similar rituals and having an informal community across various differences, and that we are spending our time in those similar rituals, either reading, taking in information, being transported. Still, one of the very few places we do that together within our communities and within our society as a whole. When we're so atomized and so separated and so made to feel like we can't have anything in common. Those places where we can be in common are invaluable in this moment. Invaluable.
yeah, I was thinking about, so you and I are both older than social media, for instance, as far
Yes.
as we know it right now. And thinking about that last week when there was a day that Facebook and Instagram were just gone for the
Mm,
day.
mm.
And I was immediately thinking about like things that I wanted to talk to people about. And I was like, okay, I'm going to immediately dial it back to like when we used to print postcards and do hand-to-hand bills, right? In bookstores, and like, this is where I'm going to talk to people about these things. Like I'm immediately going back to like the old school ways of connecting with people. Because there are many. And so bookstores often serve as like a central point for that, where you can like hang up your poster and you can start your book club and you can
I
also
love it.
like be in community with people who you are actually in community with, right?
Yes.
I do want to make sure that I offer some opportunity for the viewers to ask some questions. We have quite a few people watching. So I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to ask a question in these last few minutes that we have. So if you are listening, watching, please type your questions in the chat and I will do my best to bring them forward. In the meantime, I'm also going to make sure that I share some links with you all so that you can find the link specifically to the book. Of course, if you registered for this, I've already emailed you the link of where you can buy this book if you haven't already. But I also want to make sure that you have the link to get it here. I'm going to put this right here in the chat so all of you can see it. Oh, there we are. If you'd like to learn more about Mariame's ongoing work, oh, there's a website. If you would like to learn more about the word, we are here at, sorry, my typing is probably a bit loud. And you can learn more about Margins Bookstores. You can also find the map on our website. It's an interactive map if you want to find the bookstores near you that are participating in Margins Bookstores, and you can continue to support them year round. I'm not seeing any questions coming from the audience. A lot of affirmations, though.
Oh, that's so nice.
So
Yeah,
that's good.
somebody be brave and leave a question.
Okay, we do have a question. Can you tell us what your next book will be about?
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you for asking and for caring about it at all. The next book is a book that I'm writing with Andrea Ritchie, my friend, longtime friend and collaborator and comrade. And Andrea and I are writing a book called No More Police, which is a case for police abolition. So it's our real, our focus in that book is to really look at the audiences are mainly organizers and people who have done work around this for a while, as well as maybe people who are, liberals who have questions about, about police abolition and want to get some more kind of grounding, but that aren't, or like not necessarily, we're not thinking about like people who are firmly in the Democrats, grasp right now. But that's the book. And it really speaks. We're trying to focus on a lot of our organizing experiences. Both Andrea and myself are longtime organizers, so we're trying to bring to bear those stories that we've been engaged in, and try to help people think about the moment we're currently in and where we need to keep going. And kind of, that's our goal with the book. And it's supposed to be short, but it's getting longer by the day, so that's always a problem.
Exciting. And you said it's due in 2 weeks, so we'll see it in at the rate of publishing 2 years.
It's supposed to come out in July of
Oh,
22.
love that. Okay.
Yes.
We'll keep watching for it. Wonderful. Okay, we have another question. What is a new book that you've recently loved and been inspired by and would recommend?
Wow, that is such a good question. You know that I spend all my time recommending books on Twitter to people, and I'm always like, what is going on? Like, why can't I remember in the moment? I'll say this, I'm reading a book right now called The Other Side of Terror, Black Women and the Culture of U.S. Empire by Erica R. Edwards. And it's a book that I have really appreciated, because it's taking a different view of like how we always talk about Black women necessarily being kind of part of revolutionary change, but sometimes we're used to uphold empire. Mm-hmm. So there's a conversation in here around people like Susan Rice and Condoleezza Rice and all these Black women who, the new quite Black women that are being lifted up as like police chiefs, right? Mm-hmm. Like the face of U.S. empire being Black women is something we don't think about all that much. Because I'm writing, I've been reading a lot of books about police and policing, and a new one that I really have appreciated is one that happens to be published by Haymarket, who published We Do This, and it's called Violent Order, Essays on the Nature of Police, and it's by David Correa and Tyler Wall. So if you're interested in police and policing, that's something to really look at. I'm a huge children's book person. I love children's books, and I just picked up a new one that I adore, and that to me is actually an abolitionist text. It's a picture book called What If by a French author called Thierry Lanin. Actually Lernin, and he and it's a beautiful book. I mean, I just can't recommend it enough. The art is beautiful, the text is so just gorgeous, and it's published by Enchanted Lion Books, who publish most of my favorite children's books, actually, for art's sake. And so I'm a big fan of that. I just read another children's book that is not an illustrated children's book, but it's an oldie but goodie, called The 100 Dresses, and it's by Eleanor Estes. And I'm a big fan of that. The book is, you should, like if you stick with it at the end, you're just gonna have your heart expand so much. I mean, the list, like I said, I'm always, always, always reading and recommending books. For a book that like counters despair in this moment, I think for folks, uh, is a book by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson, which is the All We Can Save book.
Mm.
Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. I can't recommend that book enough. It's a book that has many different essays, poetry, other things in here, so accessible. You don't have to read it all at once. You could pick up so much stuff. So those are just some examples. I hope that'll give you a start.
It was wonderful. Thank you. And of course, this is going to be on YouTube. So if you need to run this back and make recommendations, you can do that. So we're also wondering about music. You mentioned music too. So Camille Chavez says, any particular music or artists that have inspired you?
Great question. Of course, Mariame Kaba is one of my favorites, always has been. I love her and I listen to her, and she reminds me of my dad when I listen to her. Salif Keita, who's one of my faves, my mom's favorites, and so I grew up listening to Salif Keita, a Malian artist that some people may know. I'm a fan of music. I am constantly DJing all of the events that we do that have been online events. I'm DJ MK and I play so many different songs. I can't express to you. In fact, we do this till we free us. I made a playlist for the book. It's got like 300 songs on there. I'm gonna look for it. It's on Spotify, and I will try to find the link and put it into the chat for folks so you can have a copy of it.
That would be
but
amazing.
That was critical to me because I love music so much. I made this really long ass playlist to go along with the book. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. And I know I don't want to keep you longer than we promised. Can I ask one last question from the audience?
Of course.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Angela Davis talks a lot about how optimism is the key for successful organizing. In the pandemic, it's hard to be that. How do you manage to be optimistic? Is a question from Heather Halak. I hope I've said your name correctly, Heather.
Oh, Heather, thank you for asking that question. I think Angela means that the concept of the Gramscian concept of optimism. She talks a lot about the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. I am not an optimist, and I don't think I need to be in order to be an organizer and to be successful in organizing, which I have been in the sense that I've been part of campaigns that have won, and I've been a part of a lot of campaigns that have lost, and that's just part of organizing. So yeah, but I would just say that for me, I'm not optimistic because optimism usually means that you think you know things will end well, and I have no idea how things are going to end, whether they're going to end well or whether they're going to end terribly. And so what I always say is that I am in fact hopeful. And, you know, I've used the aphorism that hope is a discipline. And for me, what that means is that I choose to wake up every single morning and to decide to continue to fight. And that it's a decision and that it's not about emotions. And though I have emotions and I often, you know, I can despair along with anybody else, I still get up the next morning and I make a decision that I'm going to keep pushing and I'm going to fight. Because in the end, that's what matters to me. It is what I believe, you know, it is what I believe to be like the critical ingredient in being perseverant, persistent, but still obviously having all your emotions, because some days are hard and you should grieve when you need to grieve, and you should mourn when you need to mourn. And you should also then constantly be thinking about the reality is when people say things like, you know, it is as it's always been. I'm like, no, that's actually not true. It isn't as it's always been. Because change, what did Octavia Butler teach us? You know, what did she teach us? So much, right? But she taught us that all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. To me, that is a lesson and a truth from a visionary world builder that is critically important. right? I'm not a fan of cynical people. I think sincerity is a virtue. I'm a fan of uncynical people who don't justify their inaction by suggesting that nothing will ever change, right? I think we all bring our little stones to the mix, and that we fight where we can with the resources we have, and we do the best that we can. So it's okay to despair sometimes. Like, let yourself sink into that. But it's okay also to then decide the next day that you're going to keep fighting and keep continuing. And that's easier to do if you're with other people and not by yourself.
Thank you so much for staying on with us, for answering these questions, for taking the time to talk with us tonight. I think that's the perfect way to end. There's still a couple of questions in the chat, but I think that those questions can be answered in the book. So I'm going to post the link to this because they're definitely in the book. I'm encouraging all of you to read this book, and also definitely read Parable of the Sower if you haven't yet, the full Parable series, everything Octavia Butler if you haven't yet. But thank you so much, Mariame, for being here with us tonight. Thank you so much for writing this book.
I
Thank you so
forgot
much for writing
also.
the next book. Oh, yes.
I forgot to put into the, I'm going to put into the chat, but I don't think I can't put into the comments the link to the Spotify list. So I just put it in private chat to you.
Oh, I'm
so
going to put it
for folks.
Oh, I'm going to put it right in the playlist. Yes. I'm so excited. It's amazing. And happy birthday. There are many happy birthday messages for you.
Thank you all so much. I love that. I'm excited. My birthday is October 19th, but I celebrate all month. So I'm always happy to get birthday wishes. Thank you.
Well, happy birthday. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And thank you all for joining from home. Have a beautiful evening, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Margins Bookstores again, and everybody at the Word. Bye.
Good night.